dissidents and critics of their policies. Government forces clash with the Houthi militia in Taiz province. Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations says food prices have risen globally. Good evening. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. I'm Abir Ali and you're watching the English News. Security sources reveal details of 5 secret prisons and detention facilities used by the Iran-backed terrorist Houthi militia in Sana'a since it took control of it in October 2014. According to the same sources, those secret prisons are used in detaining dissidents and anyone who criticizes the politics of the rebels. This report has more.
The Yemeni Khabar news agency revealed that the Houthi rebels have turned homes of military leaders and government service buildings into secret prisons to kidnap dissidents. The agency said these prisons are crowded with hundreds of abductees and forcibly disappeared persons who are subjected to the most heinous violations and the practice of psychological and physical torture. Media sources called on the United Nations, the International Red Cross and all international organizations concerned with human rights to intervene urgently to protect the abductees and the forcibly disappeared persons and to preserve their physical integrity and to put pressure on the Houthis to reveal their fate. According to the Euro-Mediterranean Monitor, Houthis run unofficial centers for detention, including residential buildings, schools and universities who do not meet the minimum international and local standards for detention concerning hygiene, ventilation, the provision of proper health care, water, electricity and basic necessities. The Euro-Mediterranean Monitor added that the rebels adopt various forms of torture, varying between physical and mental one. Houthis' most prominent torture method was severe beating with heavy tools such as rifle butts. They also use other forms of torture such as hanging from harness for long periods, whipping detainees while naked, and using chemical incendiary materials. This caused permanent disabilities to some detainees, while some others died during torture, especially those who were hit on the head with batons or those who were sprayed with acid. On the other hand, there were various forms of mental torture. This involved intimidation and pressuring detainees to confess to charges they didn't commit. Houthis kept them in solitary confinement, confiscated their clothes and medicines, and insulted and threatened the detainees to harm their families. They also blackmailed their families in exchange for releasing them. Most of those released suffer from psychological problems that require long-term rehabilitation.
Joint forces thwarted a large Houthi attack on Bayhan district, west of Shabwa Governorate. Military sources said violent battles took place between the two sides, in which various medium and heavy weapons were used. The sources indicated that the confrontations resulted in deaths and injuries among the Houthis, and a number of prisoners were held while the rest fled. 3 members of the Houthi militia were killed and 5 others were injured in clashes with the army forces east of Taiz. A military source stated that the militia members tried to infiltrate the army positions, but the government forces confronted these elements and inflicted multiple losses on them in lives and military equipment. The Food and Agriculture Organization said the World Price Index rose in April for the first time in a year. The organization said that the rise reflected the increase in the prices of sugar, meat and rice. The following report has more details.
The World Price Index for the UN Food Agency increased in April for the first time in a year, although it's still almost 20% higher than a record high reached in March 2020 as a result of Russia and Ukraine's war. The Food and Agriculture Organization said that the price index for the most widely traded foodstuffs averaged 127.2 points in April, as opposed to 126.5 in March. The number for March was first reported as 126.9. A Rome-based agency claimed that the increase in April was due to higher costs for sugar, pork, and rice, which partially offset falls in the price indices for cereals, dairy products, and vegetable oils. Since March, the sugar price index has increased with 17.6%, reaching its highest level since October 2011. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization, the increase is as a result of worries about shortages following negative adjustments to production predictions for China and India, as well as lower than anticipated outputs in Thailand and the European Union. According to a report by the Food Security Information Network, more than 250 million people will experience acute hunger in 2023. Countries like Yemen suffer from extreme famine. The conflict that erupted in early 2015 has led to an ongoing unprecedented humanitarian emergency. The needs of the Yemeni people regarding food far exceeded current consumption levels, with 3.5 million pregnant or breastfeeding women and children under 5 suffering from acute malnutrition, and up to 19 million people affected by food insecurity. Since the start of the Russian-Ukraine war, the global supplies of grain and other key agricultural products has disrupted and also led to the increase in food prices. Yemen is a country that highly depends on grain imports to meet the needs of the people, which are already suffering from famine. The conflict and the situation in Yemen have put many stresses on the private sector in Yemen. The present level of hunger is extremely fragile, inflicting great misery for millions of people. According to a Food and Security Information Network report, the number of people in need of immediate food, nutrition, and livelihood assistance increased for the 4th year in a row, with more than 250 million people suffering from acute hunger. Unfortunately, the help provided still does not reach everyone in Yemen, leaving many people on the verge of starvation. The humanitarian response in Yemen has turned out to be a disaster. The country has more individuals in need this year, and more lives will be lost if no help is offered.
أولاً أنا فيصل عبد صالح، أنا مسؤول مخيم الأمن المركزي في محافظة الضالع مديرية قاطبة. وبالنسبة لأم ناصر بعد وفاة ابنها ناصر وزوجها ناصر كان بالعمر 11 سنة وكان يعاني من مرض كثير في جسمه. مرض أولاً تكسرات بالدم، ثانياً وهو كان جسمه هزيل جداً. ناصر قد أصيب بمرض وهو الفتاك والقاتل الأخير، هو مرض الكوليرا، وبعدها انتقل إلى المستشفى وتفوجئنا أنه قد توفي ناصر بمرض الكوليرا، يعني دون أن نقدر أن نعمل له حاجة.
The number of internally displaced Yemenis reached more than 18,000 during the first third of this year. According to the International Organization for Migration, it has recorded the displacement of 3,035 families consisting of 18,210 individuals who have been displaced at least once. Marib Governorate witnessed the highest number of displacement cases during the first third of this year, while Taiz Governorate came in the second place. The displaced families in Lahja continue to suffer as they lack basic life necessities. Their suffering gets aggravated during summer due to lack of electrical power. This report has more.
The sun rose during the day. Ra'ad began to prepare breakfast for her family, overcoming all the difficulties and suffering inside this place. At noon, the tent becomes like a huge oven, and the means available for ventilation seem weak. Under the sunlight that penetrates the dilapidated tents. This camp is located in Al Anad region, north of Lahj Governorate. The summer heat imposes severe suffering on its residents, who come from Taiz and Al Hudaydah.
He died after being sick for 6 months, and we couldn't afford getting him medicines. We watched him die, and we couldn't help him at all.
The heat wave that penetrates 170 tents for the displaced has led to the deterioration of the health of the displaced people, especially elders and children, as their bodies cannot bear the heat wave that reached its peak during the summer. On the other hand, those in charge of this camp assert that the displaced people are suffering from the severe heat wave, the lack of food and medicine, and the bitterness of displacement from this camp, since the time period has ended according to what the camp official said.
We're here suffering from a lot of things: heat, winds, torrential rains, and insects. We've been patient for so long, but we can't take it anymore. We have children, and they deserve a better life than ours.
The number of displaced people in this camp is 519 individuals. In this hot season, people get sick a lot, especially the elders and children. They suffer from chronic diseases. Displaced people here are in severe need of a proper shelter and another land, as they are threatened with eviction from this one.
The lack of basic needs compounds the suffering of the displaced in Al Anad camp, and some residents spend their days searching for places to protect them from the summer heat, which almost kills them from vein to vein.
Messam project announced the removal of 1,133 mines, unexploded ordnance and explosive devices in the first week of this month from several Yemeni governments. According to the statistics of the project, the number of mines cleared from the beginning of the project until May has increased to about 400,000 mines, unexploded ordnance and an explosive device. Coming next in the news. Torrential rains and flooding hit major areas in Yemen and caused serious damage. Welcome back. The Ministry of Interior announced that it prevented the smuggling of 2 ancient Hebrew manuscripts through Al-Mahra government, Eastern Yemen. According to the ministry's statement, the security services at the Shahan port arrested a man while he was trying to smuggle 2 ancient Hebrew manuscripts, where he had them in his car's door. Torrential rains and flooding have hit major areas in Yemen and caused serious damage. Earlier, the United Nations warned that the country will witness heavy rains in different governments and urged citizens, especially farmers, not to stay away from waterfalls. This report has more.
Heavy seasonal rainfall since mid-March has caused flooding in many of Yemen's governorates, affecting more than 18,000 families. Floods have devastating effects on people. They cause loss of life, displacement, and damage to property and infrastructure. In Yemen, floods have caused severe damage to homes and infrastructure, including roads and bridges. The heaviest downpours have damaged IDP shelters, crops, roads, and buildings in the governorates of Al Jawf, Ma'rib, Sayoun, Hajja, Amran, Shabwa, Lahj, Al Bayda, Al Mahawit, Taiz, and Al Mahra, leaving 31 people dead, more than 37 injured, and nearly 1,000 buildings have at least partially collapsed. In the March update, the OCHA in Yemen said that numerous governorates experienced heavy rains and wind, causing various degrees of shelter damage, destroying some homes and camps. Based on the Information Management and Assessment Working Group's risk analysis, around 603,000 people in 112 districts are at high risk of floods this year. To date, 16,435 families have been affected. Out of the top 3 affected governorates, Ma'rib has been the worst impacted, with around 8,000 families affected, followed by Hajjah 2,228 families and Amran 1,454 families. Yemen is prone to recurrent seasonal flooding, which results in displacement, disruption to livelihoods, a spike in waterborne diseases, loss of crops, and property damage. In 2022, climate-related events triggered a 93% increase in new and secondary displacements concentrated in Al Hudaydah, Al Jawf, Ma'rib, and Taiz governorates. According to the Global Disaster Alert and Coordination System and Media, at least 5 people have died, including in Shabwa and Abyan governorates. In addition, at least 30 houses have been destroyed or damaged in southwestern areas by flash floods, displacing people. Torrential rains and flooding alone affected over 517,000 people and displaced over 170,000 individuals. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations reported 30 homes damaged in Saleh district in Taiz governorate. Areas in southern, central, and western Yemen have been affected by torrential rainfall in early April, causing floods and resulting in casualties and damage. This is the second time in a month that Yemen is hit by floods, affecting the already vulnerable population of Yemen.
The local authorities in Al-Mahra Governorate confirmed that the recent death of the quantity of fish on the coast of the Governorate was a result of the use of prohibited fishing methods by some fishermen. The authorities confirmed that the accident was not caused by dredging operations or toxic materials, as some have circulated on social media. Liverpool striker Mohamed Salah will become the highest-scoring Egyptian of all time if he finds the net against Brentford in the Premier League on Saturday. More on this story is within this report.
With a goal against Brentford in the Premier League, Liverpool forward Mohamed Salah became the highest-scoring Egyptian player of all time, with a penalty in Liverpool's 1-0 victory over Fulham. Salah, who has now scored 314 goals in a career for a club and a country, tied the mark held by former Egypt captain Hussein Hassan. The goal was also his 186th for Liverpool since signing in 2017, tying him with former captain Steven Gerrard for 6th most in club history. Mohamed Salah has already scored 30 goals this season and a century at Liverpool's Anfield Stadium. Salah scored for AS Roma 34 goals, Fiorentina 9 goals, Chelsea 2, Basel 20 goals, and Al Mawlin Al Arab 12 goals. But the exact number of goals scored by players Salah and Hussein Hassan cannot be identified precisely. The scene of Jurgen Klopp, Liverpool's coach, saluting the Egyptian player Mohamed Salah by praising the cap is the perfect expression of what Salah's career deserves. At the end of the game, Klopp bowed to Salah and took his hat off after he broke Robbie Fowler's record and became the scorer for the Reds in the Premier League in 6 years. But the Egyptian winger was able to break the record achieved by Fowler in 9 years.
This record was in my mind since I came here. I think after my first season, I was always chasing that record. So I get it today against United with that result is unbelievable. So yeah, I'm going home, celebrate with the family, and have chamomile tea and sleep.
Salah's figures from the time he moved to Liverpool are so many. He's a great example to the whole world that nothing is ever impossible or happens by luck. With the club's most recent victory, Liverpool is 5th in the table and has a chance of qualifying for the Champions League next season.
Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Security sources in Sana'a reveal new secret prisons used by the militia against dissidents and critics of their policies. Government forces clash with the Houthi militia in Taiz province. Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations says food prices have risen globally. This is the end of the news. It was Abir Ali, and thank you for watching.